It looks like Miami might be making an upgrade to their roster, and if so, well, Donovan Mitchell is a name that's frequently been linked to the team. Is it worth exploring a trade for the disgruntled Utah Jazz superstar? We'll break that down in today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Heat Nation. It's a Thursday edition of Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, bringing you all things covering the Miami Heat. However, you may be listening on YouTube, Odyssey, your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making us your first listen every day. I'm David Ramil, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Wes Goldberg. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. Well, Wes, we're just a couple days into the offseason for Miami, unfortunately, but already we've been talking about potential changes to the upgrade or upgrading the roster in some capacity. And one of the names that seems to be linked the most to the Miami Heat, according to reports around several sources, is that Donovan Mitchell might be looking to get out of Utah and that Miami has him high on their list of a potential acquisition. What do you think about the news reporting Mitchell or linking Mitchell? Because I know actual report, but linking Mitchell to the Miami Heat.
Well, it's not the first we've heard of this link, right? The connection between Donovan Mitchell and the Miami Heat. There's so many things that go there. I mean, obviously, as you and I talked about before Donovan Mitchell was drafted, the Heat were high on Donovan Mitchell in that draft. And we were too, by the way, very high on Donovan Mitchell. But the Heat have always liked him. The Heat have always liked this guy. And when Dwayne Wade became part owner of the Utah Jazz, that only inflamed sort of that connection, right, among league circles. And all the reports are based on league insiders, league personnel believe that the Heat are the most likely destination. We have yet to hear an actual report that ties the Miami Heat front office being interested in trading for Donovan Mitchell this offseason, right? We haven't seen that report that Heat interested in trading for Donovan Mitchell. It's just league insiders believe that the Heat are a likely landing spot. So the phrasing, the wording of these reports, really important to keep an eye on. And I want to stress that to our listeners, that you really read how these reports are written, because that stuff does matter. That said, he makes a lot of sense because he's young. He's right there in Bam Adebayo's timeline. So if you're going to try to extend this window, that makes a whole lot of sense. The Heat, they needed a secondary scorer. We could talk about Max Strus's three getting overturned, Jimmy Butler's three-pointer at the end. If it goes in, the Heat are in the final. All this stuff. You could play the results, but it was very clear during the conference finals that the Heat needed a secondary scorer. Now, maybe that secondary scorer is as simple as Tyler Herro being not injured and available. But Tyler Herro wasn't exactly lighting it up in the playoffs before he got hurt either. So if the Heat believe that they need to make an upgrade and get a bona fide second star next to Jimmy Butler, and Donovan Mitchell is indeed this unhappy in Utah and with the Jazz and everything going on just with them in terms of them possibly blowing it up, right? Then there's a lot of reasons why Donovan Mitchell makes sense for a potential target for the Heat to look at this summer.
You're right. I look, it's an interesting name, and we're seeing more and more people talk about it. Again, Mitchell has been a name that's been long linked to Miami for many reasons that you just outlined. And yet I just can't imagine the world that Utah wants to give up on a superstar at that point in time. And I understand that there are faults in his game, which we'll get into later on. There's lots of different ways that we can look at this potential scenario playing out here. I don't know exactly where to take the discussion because it seems so big. Like, first and foremost, I guess, is it worth, we talked about this yesterday, is it worth blowing up this roster? I'm still stuck on no. Like, I think Pat Riley would make a big move. I don't know if Mitchell is the whale that he's been coveting for the past few years. I think we talked about this yesterday. He made the moves on the fringes, bringing Kyle Lowry, PJ Tucker, other veterans, Victor Oladipo, re-signing him, etc. That still seems like the big plan moving forward is just to continue to retool this roster. But if you're going to go all in and go for the big splash, is Mitchell the best name available so that you could upgrade this roster significantly?
No, I actually don't think he's the best player for this team. I think he's the best player potentially available. And by the way, that's a really good point you make. We don't know if he's available. We don't know if he's available. It would require probably two things. The Jazz being willing to just blow this whole thing up in a way that wasn't just trading Rudy Gobert. And it kind of sounds like the smoke is, okay, they're going to probably move Gobert for something and try to reconfigure the roster around one-star Donovan Mitchell. But if they decide that, hey, we're going to trade Gobert, and by the way, we're going to also trade Donovan Mitchell and start totally from scratch, and there's recent reports that Quinn Snyder might not be back. If Donovan Mitchell talks, it just says to the front office, hey, Snyder's not back, Gobert's not back, get me out of here, or I'm going to make your life like the worst ever. Like I could see a way that Donovan Mitchell is able to force his way out, but that's going to also be pretty tough. And I don't really know how much leverage he has. That said, there's a lot of variables here, a lot of things that have to kind of be checked off in order for Donovan Mitchell to even become available as a trade target. But look, on the surface, all of this makes sense. Donovan Mitchell, the connection to the Miami, the fact that the Heat need a secondary scorer, the Dwayne Wade thing, and Donovan Mitchell's own games being so resembling so much Dwayne Wade's game too. And obviously that feels like it would have a home here in Miami. All of the surface level connections make sense. But when you start to dig into this a little bit more, there are some issues with this trade, which is why I'm not sure this is ultimately where Pat Riley wants to end up. Like what you said, maybe that's not the exact whale that he should be going for. Like if you trade, so here's what the package would be. Let's just get right into this. No. It would like if the Heat were gonna make a trade like this, the starting point is for Donovan Mitchell or otherwise, for whatever star. If the Heat are looking to upgrade, they're gonna start calling around about, hey, what can we get for Tyler Herro, Duncan Robinson, and this assortment of first-round picks? They have the 27th pick here. They could pick that. They can trade that pick and 2023, depending on the timing of it, and then an additional pick in the future that they unlocked during the trade with the Thunder at the deadline earlier this year. So they have 3 first-round picks that they could potentially move, plus Tyler Herro, Duncan Robinson, and that doesn't even include Kyle Lowry, who we'll get to here in a moment. But that's the starting point for a trade, right? And then you could throw in whatever combination of Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, and all that stuff in negotiations. But that's the starting point. To move all of that for Donovan Mitchell, David, is a lot. And this is a point that I made a couple months ago when all this stuff really started to surface was you've got to be damn sure that if you add Donovan Mitchell and you trade all of your stuff, that there's the opportunity cost that comes with that. You've got to be really sure that when adding Donovan Mitchell to Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler, that you have significantly increased your chances to get out of the Eastern Conference and into the NBA Finals. And as much as we love Donovan Mitchell, I'm not sure he's that player just yet. Are you?
I'll answer that in the next segment before we talk about. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about it because I think it's a lengthy discussion and we have to get into it. Not just that, the proposed package, the fit in Miami, so much to kind of look at. And I don't know that even one show will begin to adequately cover because it's such an interesting conversation and there are no clear answers there. But one thing is clear is that this episode is brought to you by RockAuto.com. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questions from the person behind the counter? They're asking you what type of car you have, what make and model. Maybe you don't even know the specifics. If it's an EX or an LX, you don't know exactly what you're looking for. They start looking at you, questioning what you're talking about. And then, it's just an uncomfortable situation. Why go through all that? You have a computer at home, the same one that they do in their office. And you know what? You can find rockauto.com and find all the parts you're looking for on their easy-to-navigate website. Just a few clicks, you get what you're looking for. You save time, you save money. I've done it many times. You save hundreds of dollars. It feels good. It's light on your wallet. Who doesn't love that feeling? I know I certainly do. So right now, if you go to rockauto.com, find all the parts you're looking for your car or truck, and then when you're done, ready to check out, you go to the section that says, how did you hear about us? Write the phrase locked on so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure to go check out the Locked On NBA Big Board. Host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and the author of the NBA Big Board newsletter is joined by Richard Stayman, Stam Ferris, Lee Thulin, giving fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft, mock draft, player rankings, and of course, big boards. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. So, Wes, You brought up an interesting question right before the break. What was that question again? Exactly again?
Well, let's just talk about Donovan Mitchell's fit potentially on the Heat. If you were going to trade everything, Tyler Herro, Duncan Robinson, all the draft picks, okay, now you're looking at Kyle Lowry, Donovan Mitchell, Jimmy Butler, PJ Tucker if he opts in and he's not moved into any other deal, and Bam Adebayo. That's your starting five. My concern with that now, are you really going to have 2 6-foot guards in your backcourt? That's going to be a defensive issue. And by the way, Donovan Mitchell has not shown a whole lot of interest in playing defense lately. You've got to believe that when he comes to Miami and he's part of that whole thing, that he'll show a little bit more interest in playing defense, but we got to see it before we believe it. And even if he does, we're still talking about 2 smallish guards in your backcourt. And now you're kind of looking at what the Jazz already had between Mike Conley and Donovan Mitchell. And as you know, as good as Mike Conley is as an individual defender, and as good as Donovan Mitchell projects to be as a potential defender, that had holes. Like we saw the Jazz defense completely break down in the playoffs, despite having Rudy Gobert in the middle. It's just not enough. And so I wonder if that's even a logical fit. Yeah, offensively, he's another playmaker, another shot creator for you. But defensively, I don't know that that's sustainable, especially given how, Lowry is aging.
No, I think it's a great point. There's a lot to like about Donovan Mitchell, his youth, although he's, shy of 26 right now. So he's getting older. I mean, of course, he still has years left where he can be a productive player. He's already a 3-time All-Star. He can hit big shots. He can take big shots. He can create off the dribble. Obviously, he's a much better 3-point shooter than Jimmy Butler, much better 3-point shooter than Dwayne and whoever was too. And it's just, that's something that you absolutely needed at times as a complementary scorer, as we've said many times to Jimmy Butler. Having said that, there are holes in his game. One thing in particular is the defense. I think you're going to be frustrated as a Heat fan watching him kind of use the Toreador defense so often, as a quicker ball handler might get past him. Maybe not even a quicker ball handler, just somebody. It makes Mitchell look almost frequently like he's just disengaged or not really interested in playing defense. So he's saving all of his energy for the offensive attack. And then that's the other big question mark about him, at least from my perspective, is that he's too ball dominant at times where you've got 4 other guys kind of just looking on there, which is the big complaint from Rudy Gobert, allegedly, reportedly, because he tends to dominate too much. He forces the action. He attacks the basket, takes bad shots. If you're complaining about Tyler Herro's not being able to generate offense or Kyle Lowry they're infinitely more efficient, even at this stage, than Donovan Mitchell. Donovan has the ball in his hands much more than any other player. Imagine Jimmy Butler attacking the basket and not being able to get to the rim and not getting to the free throw line with the same frequency. That's basically a smaller version of that. I don't.
No, it's a really good point. It's a really good point. I mean, Donovan Mitchell's usage percentage is really high in Utah. I think if you're pro trading for Donovan Mitchell and you're a Heat fan, you probably would say, well, who else is he going to pass it to on the Jazz? That's a fair point. Like, that's a really solid point. It's not as if there's another guy on that roster that you're like giving the ball to and you're saying, hey, you go score. Rudy Gobert does not make his own offense. In fact, he really does need Donovan Mitchell to create the offense for him. But I mean, he's not even that efficient. He's a 36% career 3-point shooter from a large volume of shots. The assists are fine, but the assist to turnover ratio is not great with him. And look, I don't want to get into the mode of bashing Donovan Mitchell. I think he's a really good player. I think he's with a phenomenal ceiling and is that kind of guy who could potentially turn into the player that can lead you to a championship. But I know also that he's not that right now. And I don't know that, to your point, sharing the court with Jimmy Butler, he's only 26. He's just entering his prime. Is he at the stage of his career where he's willing to give up stuff in order to win? I don't know. I would assume that if he's trying to force his way to Miami, then he probably thinks he is. But we've seen this before. Stars forcing their way somewhere thinking that they're ready to sacrifice to win for the greater good. And regardless of age, regardless of experience, regardless of skill set, sometimes they just don't. Sometimes they don't sacrifice where they need to. James Harden, Russell Westbrook, we can go down the list. It doesn't always happen with these guys, especially high usage guards where it's harder for them to make an impact without the ball. And like I said, Donovan Mitchell, not a great catch and shoot 3-pointer. That's the 3-point shooter. That's not what he's known for. He's not impacting the game defensively either. He really does need the ball in his hands. Does that also maybe free up Jimmy Butler to be more of an off-ball guy? Could be. And that's kind of what he was during the regular season. We forget, like, the player we saw in the playoffs was very different than the one we saw in the regular season. But we're not worried about the regular season right now, David. We're worried about the playoffs. The Heat don't have regular season problems. They have playoff problems. And I'm not exactly sure how Jimmy Butler and Donovan Mitchell mesh.
Well, that brings me to my next point here, because I was going to say, look, I don't really like the package that's being discussed. And again, I've used this before. There's a dehumanization when you're looking at all these players as assets. Okay, I can't get into it because, I mean, this is the world we live in. And you're looking at potentially trading X number of players for an X number of players. And that having been said, Tyler Herro is a really, really fine young player at 22 with a lot of potential upside, who was dealing with nagging injury throughout the playoffs and probably could have been much more impactful than he had been. He's got a lot of, again, potential to actualize, and he can do so in a Heat uniform for substantially less money being paid than Donovan Mitchell. Having said that, you're also giving away potentially Duncan Robinson, a fine shooter who wound up being out of the lineup in a rotation most of the postseason, but still a potentially good player. Like we've seen it over the last 3 seasons of his career. Max Strus, another guy with high upside. Yeah. You're talking about Gabe Vincent. I've seen some trade scenarios, including PJ Tucker and Omer Yurtseven. And, of course, the potential draft picks, which I couldn't care less about, but that's a lot to acquire Donovan Mitchell. Having said that, and then again, you're still stuck with Mitchell's high salary, Jimmy's high salary, Kyle's high salary, etc. You don't have to worry about the extension for Tyler. Yeah, Bams. I'm sorry. Yeah, Bams. What? And I hate almost saying it. What if you were to keep all those players that you're talking about, and what if you were to trade Jimmy Butler for Donovan Mitchell?
Well, if Utah's rebuilding, they're not doing that. So, I mean, that's a non-starter.
Well, maybe
and
it's not.
And you end up okay. Now if you're the Heat, and you don't do it too because you're kind of stuck with the same problem. Now you need to go find a secondary star for Donovan Mitchell, which you don't have. So none of that really.
Bam. You got Bam, well, and it gives you more
Bam with Jimmy, third star, whatever. We could talk an additional star next. Like if you trade one star for another star, now you just have the same amount of stars, right? Regardless of what you think about Bam or Tyler or anybody.
Well, let's hear me out. Maybe this is big, big board.
You're resetting the window.
Yeah. Well, sort of. Like, what if you trade Lowry to Portland for Dame Lillard? What if you trade Jimmy for Donovan Mitchell?
Why is Portland trading Damian Lillard for Kyle Lowry?
I don't know. I mean, I'm just throwing names out there. I'm just saying there's a way of resetting this roster without you can break up the pairing of Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry. And at the same time, you can acquire superstars in return.
Why are you hesitant to trade? Like, you named a bunch of players. You're like, instead of all these players, let's just trade Jimmy Butler instead. Like, are you that worried about losing Max Strus?
No. Well, I think, yeah, actually, I think.
So you're picking Max Strus over Jimmy Butler?
Not in a vacuum necessarily. It's just how do you look? Jimmy missed time this year. He missed time last year. Phenomenal. I don't think there's any doubting how much I appreciate Jimmy Butler. And at the same time, like, can you continue to look? Just 2 months ago, before his playoff outing, everybody was talking about trading his ass after that blow up in March, right? And I know that maybe it was awfully reactionary or whatever, but when you're looking down the road and you're looking at the possibility of paying him $55 billion at age 37 and knowing that he's probably not going to be contributing offensively at that point, maybe it's time to start looking for trading him to a potential.
I mean, you're talking about basically what Boston did with their veterans and trading them all to Brooklyn for a bunch of draft picks and sort of resetting their roster, which ended up being the roster that just beat the Heat and got to the finals. So I understand where you're going with that, but it's never going to happen again. I just don't see it. I don't see if the Jazz are going to blow it up, they're not going to blow it up and then acquire Jimmy Butler. That doesn't make any sense for them and their resetting window. I hear what you're saying, and I get the logic to it, but it's never going to happen, and I feel like we've already spent too much time talking about it. But I hear what you're saying. Like, the thought crossed my mind earlier as well. Like, if you wanted to reset this roster around the windows of Bam Adebayo and Tyler Herro, then that's one way to do it, is to trade Jimmy Butler. But also, if you trade Jimmy Butler, there's no guarantee that you're ever this close to winning a championship again. And we also know that Pat Riley is not interested in pushing the window out further. He's trying to expand the window right now into basically whatever is next season. All of this really comes down to, David, is what does Pat Riley and this front office think about Tyler Herro? That's what we're really talking about here. If they think that Tyler Herro can come back and become a starter and that secondary shot creator that Jimmy Butler needs, or maybe not even a starter, but you know what I mean, a starting level player and that consistency, and be that second scorer that Jimmy Butler desperately needed in the conference finals that he did not have, if they think Tyler Herro can be that, then you're not as willing to put him and all those other things that we were talking about and completely deplete your depth right, in the process in order to acquire Donovan Mitchell, even if we all agree that Donovan Mitchell is a superior player. Like that's really the question here, is if you think Tyler can get to that level. And if you don't, then you start calling around the league, Donovan Mitchell or otherwise, you start calling around the league with that package. Herro, Duncan Robinson, the 27th pick. Let's start there and see what it can get us. But that's really what the fundamental question is.
Agreed. Having said all this, I know I've just proposed some crazy talk, and I know it's probably going to sting everybody following, a historically great performance from Jimmy Butler. But there are concerns about his age, and whether or not he can continue to do this next season and beyond all that. And
what's the other side of that? I'm sorry, but the other side of that too is that's the reason why you might not want to trade for Donovan Mitchell, because even if he can become that player, and we all think the world of his ceiling, if he's not that player right now, you might be looking to go acquire more veteran help for that Tyler Herro, Duncan Robinson draft pick package, right? Than even a Donovan Mitchell. And you pair a more veteran player that's ready to play at a championship level and go win a finals than even Donovan Mitchell. If you could go get that player and pair him with Jimmy Butler, then you've basically just said, the heck with the future window. Let's go win a championship right now, which is kind of more how this roster is built.
And who has said veteran player that?
I don't know.
Oh,
I love the idea of Damian Lillard, but it doesn't sound like he's leaving Portland. He's going to give it another go, I guess, with the Trailblazers. Like, good for him. Bradley Beal's not that guy. I just don't think that he's like that helpful of a winning player. I'm not a big Bradley Beal guy. So I don't really know who that is. There's other guys that I like, but we've got I like the idea of Zach LaVine, but he's a free agent, and there's a lot going on there with the Clutch Sports Group and all that stuff. But like Zach LaVine makes a lot of sense to me as a player who's probably a better fit, even if he's not as good of a player than Donovan Mitchell. And then beyond that, we're talking about other minor tweaks that we can get into on another episode. But those, as far as the stars, those are the kind of guys that I would be looking at.
So I'm not sure that we necessarily address the overall issue, but there's still plenty of time. It's the offseason.
What's the overall issue?
About Donovan Mitchell and his tradability, whether or not he's the right fit. I mean, we answered the question to some degree, but
I thought we pretty much nailed that.
Maybe. I just feel like we could go on and not come to any clear resolution as to whether or not we should acquire or Miami should acquire.
And that's okay.
Yeah, and that's okay. Yeah, I think these are the questions that
it's not black and white.
Day.
That's why it's a really hard job, and I'm glad I don't have that job, even though it comes with a much better salary. But it's not just a thing that you and I can just sit here and be like, yep, do it, done. Like there's so much gray area with this.
Just a reminder that our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs to esports and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
The Golden State Warriors are minus 150, the favorites in the NBA Finals against the Boston Celtics. Joining me now, Robert Horry, 7-time NBA champion, is here courtesy of BetOnline. Check out BetOnline for all the up-to-date lines on the NBA Finals, Finals MVP, Finals props, and each and every game line. This is great to have you here. Why do you think, because the line has moved a little bit in the Celtics' favor, why do you think there are people that like the Celtics matchup against the Warriors?
Because the smart people know defense wins championships. And if you look at the Celtics team, they got two players on that team that made the all-defensive team. Smart, of course, defensive player of the year. But Robert Williams is one of those guys that he's an eraser. He can block shots. He can, he can erase a lot of mistakes that you make on the perimeter. And you think about, you got Brown, Tatum, and Smart, who can get up on people defensively and funnel them to that guy. Next thing you know, is getting blocked. And if you look at the way, Hartford has been playing, he's turned back the hands of time. He's blocking shots again. So overall, I think that the Celtics is a better defensive team than the Warriors, because even though you have Draymond Green, Klay Thompson is not the Klay Thompson of old, who can do the things he used to be able to do. And so I just think that's a big key for them, for the Celtics, that is.
How do you see Defensive Player of the Year Marcus Smart matching up with Steph Curry? Is that going to be something where you see that Marcus is going to pick him up 94 feet. Like, how do you think Smart is going to approach that assignment if he does get that assignment, which we assume he's going to?
But you know what? I don't think it's going to be a one-man job. If you look at the Celtics, they 1, 2, 3 are all athletic guys, and you go to the 2, Jalen, and go to the Tatum, they get taller. It's like the bars on a cell phone. And I think even though they like to do a lot of switching, I think they're perfect for this matchup. It's a perfect matchup for the Celtics, and when they got to guard them, because Clay is going to be constantly moving. And so sort of, not the same as a Jimmy Butler or Tyler Herro, but I think what they just did against the Heat is like a preclude to what they're going to do. And so I think they're going to be fine defensively switching and getting ready for Steph.
It sounds like you like the Celtics in this one.
All my Laker fans are going to be mad at me because they say you cannot wear anything green. You can never root for the Celtics. I'm not rooting for the Celtics. I would like to see my former teammate, Ime Udoka, win his first championship, so I would like for that to happen. But, I just think being the basketball mindset, I just think that there's a good chance the Celtics could win this thing.
All right, so we have some odds here. Celtics in 6 is plus 375. Celtics in 7 is plus 650. If people are going to bet on it, what is your prediction? If you like Boston, 6, 7?
Hey, you know what? If you try to make some money, right? that's why you gamble. And so I would go with the Celtics in 7 because I think the Celtics have been a battle-tested team on the road. They've won a lot of games on the road. They just won the Eastern Conference on the road, and so I think they're ready. Not saying everybody will say, well, the Heat is a different monster than, the Warriors and blah, blah, blah. But I still think it all boils down to having confidence and playing well on the road and believing that you can win on the road.
There's also been this discussion now, especially among Celtics fans, about what this Celtics team has had to face, particularly who Jason Tatum has had to face. Kevin Durant in the first round, Giannis Antetokounmpo in the second round, Jimmy Butler on a heater, no pun intended, for Miami, and now Steph Curry. You're talking about at least 3 pantheon guys who are all-time great players. Who do you think has the most on the line legacy-wise in this series? For whom would that one title, you won 7, who would that one title mean the most for?
I'm going to go off script a little bit, and I'm going to stop people from thinking this is going to be the greatest run ever by the Celtics. That's not true, because you got Hornacek, Karl Malone, you got Kevin Johnson, Charles Barkley, you got Dennis Rodman, MVP, David Robinson, then you got Shaquille and Penny. Now that is the greatest run back in 95. So when people say this might be the greatest run, stop it. You know what I'm saying? Because all these teams was 55, 50 plus win teams. And so I just think if you look at this game and you have to pick an MVP, of course, it's going to be Tatum. But this run that the Celtics are on is incredible. Don't get me wrong, because they've been able to win on the road, which is key, because you have to win on the road in order to win championship. That's unless you have home court advantage and you protect your home court. But I just think overall, when you look at the makeup of these two teams, they're similar. Golden State Warriors, they were the Celtics 6-7 years ago when they first entered the playoffs. And nobody thought they could win a championship. Next thing you know, they win a championship. Then the following season, they win all these games and don't win a championship. And then they get KD, then they win 2 more. But I think if you look at the Celtics, there are so many similarities with these teams that people are always going to say, oh, let's go with the veteran leadership. Let's go with the fan favorite and Steph. Let's think about it. Because everybody wants Steph to win, because we know he got robbed one time with the MVP in the finals. And then he took a step back and let KD come into his team, which is Steph's team, and take 2 MVPs. And so I do think Steph has a lot to prove, and his legacy is on the line when it comes to this, because all the chatter now is about him not having a MVP in the finals, which we all know he was robbed and won. So let's be real about that.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at these MVP odds as you're talking about the MVP, and we expect Curry and Tatum right at the top in terms of the odds. You're not getting really good value there. I'm looking at Jaylen Brown 10-1. Yeah. I'm looking at Draymond 22-1. Like, if he really turned it up defensively, people forget in that game 7 against the Cavs, he had a triple-double in that game. He was the best Warrior on the floor in that game. I'm looking at Marcus Smart at 40-1. It seems like you can get some good value. And we've seen, including in this Warriors run, that it's not always the stars who win these finals MVPs.
It's true. For me, if I wanted to take the odds, I'm going to eliminate the top three automatically. And I don't think Clay is, Clay is a game 5, game 6 type of player. But me, I would go with Andrew Wiggins. If I had to pick someone with the odds, I would go with Andrew Wiggins, who is 20-1. And think about it. He has started to come into his own.
Yep.
After that dunk on Luka, all of a sudden this dude is smiling big. He's enthusiastic. He's playing hard, and he's an all-star. I think some people forget he was an all-star. I think this is a good way, and the biggest stage, to show everybody that the all-star committee didn't make a mistake. So if I had to take because I don't think Draymond Green, he doesn't shoot enough, and he's going to have to guard too many people, so he's going to be all over the board. So if you look down that list of people and you want to say, odds maker, for me, I would take Andrew Wiggins 20-1.
That is, that's bold. I love it. I think you're right that he seems to be a different player. Just in the Warriors, just in Golden State, he seems to have been unlocked a little bit, whether that's Steve Kerr, whether that's just him feeling more comfortable. We're talking about legacy. And you have been on some teams that have gone on these multi-year runs that have been what we might consider dynastic, right? There have been some discussions here. If the Warriors win one, that because it's the Clay, Steph, Draymond core with Steve Kerr, that this has to be considered part of the Warriors run and that we have to call them a dynastic team. Where do you fall on that discussion? If they win one, are they a dynasty?
You know what? I will put them in that category as a dynasty. Because they was riddled with injuries,
right?
2 years, Clay was out, and Steph went out. You say, okay, we'll give them a Phil Jackson asterisk by those 2 years. But if they're able to get back to the mountaintop and win this year, I would put them, you got one more step to be a dynasty. And then if they go to the finals again, then I would give them a dynasty. But, think about this. They gave us a dynasty in the Lakers. We won 3 in a row. And next thing you know, they dismantle a team. They go back and lose. It's considered a dynasty. So, to me, there's only been, 3 dynasties in this: Bulls, the Celtics, and the Lakers, because they're in a situation where they win 6+ championships. That's what you look at. But in this day, in this era, you can give them a dynasty.
I think I would consider the Spurs, the Tim Duncan, Greg Popovich Spurs in that mix, but they never won back-to-back titles. And so it depends on how you want to qualify it. Sustained success, not always enough. I think if you're a Boston fan, you're going, why can't we have that sustained run? We've got these 2 young superstars, Marcus Smart, Defensive Player of the Year, who's coming into his own a little bit defensively. It seems like they've unlocked some things with him as their pure point guard in initiating offense because he doesn't have to create for everyone. They've got Tatum and Brown who can create for themselves. I mean, what do you think the chances are that they could be not the next dynasty, but the next team that you have to deal with in the Eastern Conference? Like, okay, they're going to be there every year until further notice.
I think you look down that line and you says, okay, Tatum, first team, max. Brown, max. Smart, max. These are super max contracts these guys potentially can get. Right. So now since I cover the Lakers got $40 million guys, $40 million guys. They can't get nobody else on the team unless they do some hell of a drafting, and they get those guys that's going to be there. But it boils down to payday, man. If you're going to stick around and get paid, or you're going to have that one falter and say, we didn't win a championship, we need to make a move because, they exploited us in this area. We need to get someone in, and they trade one of those guys. People do dumb things like that. Well, GMs, I should say. So I think they have the potential to make a long run. They're just going to have to stick together and do what a Tim Duncan would do and say, I'm going to take less money so you can sign a Tony Parker, you sign a Manu Ginobili. But are these guys now, selfless enough where they say, hey, you know what? I don't want to make 40 million. I'll make 30 million. I don't think so. I think every guy now is trying to get their bag so they can say, you know what? At one point in my career, I was making 50, 40 million, whatever it may be. So that's going to be the key though. It boils down to money if they can keep that team together.
All right. Not a finals question, but I can't talk to Big Shot Bob and not ask you this question. Which of your big shots is your favorite?
I grew up a Lakers fan, a huge Magic Johnson fan. And one of my biggest thrills before I even made to the NBA, I got to play one-on-one with Magic. when I was being scouted by the Lakers coming out of college, coming out of University of Alabama. So the shot I made against the Sacramento Kings in 2001 to win that game is probably my favorite. And don't get me wrong, I love what I did in Houston. I love what I did in San Antonio. But everything I did in San Antonio was on the road, Game 5 on the road. But this was at home in Staples Center. And the ego comes into play where you want to hear that crowd chant your name, man. And you run off the court and the crowd's still chanting your name. You in the locker room, you can still hear them chanting your name. So I think that shot, it takes over all the other shots just for the ego. You know, all as athletes got some type of ego. And I think for me, that just takes over because I had the Laker fans chanting my name. They wasn't chanting Shaq. They wasn't chanting Kobe. They were chanting Ori. So that's a big plus for me.